Tom, talk to me about, what is your actual title on this production?
Senior scientific researcher.
Okay.
So I help to wrangle the science, talk to other scientists, make sure everything is accurate as it can be, and read a lot of papers.
That sounds really simple.
On paper, it's simple. In practice.
Yeah, so I have so many questions. I'm going to start at the beginning. Were you part of the production from the inception?
No, it was weird. I was in academia. I was lecturing.
You have an actual doctorate.
I have an actual doctorate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did it on the hydrodynamics of fossil fishes, including sharks.
The hydrodynamics of fossil fishes.
Yep. And
so you mean extinct fishes?
Extinct fishes and modern sharks and things. So it was a real weird merge of engineering and paleontology and sharks. And I was lecturing.
Coelacanths, did those come into your research?
Yeah, exactly. All that kind of thing. And so I was lecturing on paleontology, and I got made redundant. A week later, I was offered a position at Silverback Films.
Oh, so wait, you were you were made redundant at the university you lectured at.
Yes, they ran out of money to have me on. So yeah.
They found another hydrodynamic specialist, and you were off too.
So yeah, it was really fortunate. So I was out of work for about a week, and then a friend said, "Would you like to sort of fill in with me with Silverback?" So I did a short interview with Dan, and it kind of went on from there. I got the most contract extensions ever because I started a week and then another week, and then they just kept me on for 4 years, which is great.
Now, within the production, are you like Dan's homunculus, or are you dealing with production and fielding a whole bunch of different questions?
Everyone always has questions because it's one of those productions where you've got every single person as a trained biologist or someone who really knows animals backwards.
Right.
But paleontology side of things, that requires the textbooks, the papers, all of that kind of thing. So constant questions about, should this animal have eyelashes? What should the skin look like?
Oh.
All those kind of really small things that actually I hadn't really thought about, and I had to go away and research. So everyone was asking questions all the time, and it was very much a forward and backwards thing between us.
And so even though you've got a doctorate, this still sounds like you were regularly reading research you had no prior experience with.
Absolutely.
And ingesting it enough to be useful. Ultimately, I mean, and this is the hardest part about being a science advisor, I believe, is you want the people that you're talking to be happy with what ends up on screen as the explanation.
Of course. Yes, absolutely. And we were not completely oblivious to the fact that there are some animals that we have in this show that are going to be very controversial because there's such a large amount of research that's been done on one. Yeah, T-Rex is an example.
Right.
You've got a fantastic skull of a T-Rex. I'm so jealous. But that's one of those animals that's so charismatic that everyone's going to have an opinion, and there's so much research done on it as well. So my job was not only to read all those papers, but just get rid of the noise, because there's so much research that's perhaps not quite as good as others, and you have to really draw out the truth from that. So it's a comprehension exercise more than anything else.
It's a little counterintuitive, though, because I would have assumed that there would be an inverse relationship between the amount of research and the amount of controversy. But you're saying it's a direct relationship.
Yes, because there are so many papers and especially new papers. If a new paper comes out and says T-Rex did this, that, and the other, immediately everyone says that must be the right theory or hypothesis. And sometimes we have to take a step back and say, actually, it might be the latest paper, but it hasn't got the weight of evidence behind it. So it was very considered. We didn't just go for the shiny new headline. It was always very much a academic exercise.
I ended up sort of organically becoming a science advisor to my own show, just like Jamie did, like we all did. But one of the things that is lasting for me is I end up getting really cranky about crappy claims in the media when they just found a wooden structure, right? That's whatever it is, 80,000 years old. So it predates the, whatever. And the headline then says, earliest human structure found. And you're like, no. And early structure, right?
Yes.
But that thought process that I'm going through is not dissimilar than your actual job on this production.
Yes, and we've really got to make sure that we don't just read the headlines. We go back to the original source literature, because I don't think it's intentional most of the time. I think it's people who maybe don't have a science background who are hearing what a scientist says. Sometimes, most times scientists aren't great at explaining their own ideas.
To the layperson, it's true.
There's lots of filters there before it actually gets printed. And so it's no fault of people who are actually printing this stuff, but it's our job to just make sure everything is tied in a bow.
And in my experience, calling around to experts and trying to find people that could help me, I definitely came out with a point of view that for television, the best experts for me were always the ones who specified in something, but had a lot of other experience too. Because in science communication, you're often taking 5 to 6 to a dozen different disciplines and coalescing them. Did you find the same thing?
Yes. The best scientists to deal with are the ones that have a very magpie-like curiosity. They will have done biomechanics and then they'll moved on to something else and then something else. And they're just all the time looking for shiny things to study.
Yeah.
And they've often got the best experience and also
they have
the
all
best
this context about how their thing fits into other things.
Yeah, and the better wider knowledge as well. You're sort of forced to learn something new and different and weird.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate. I started studying mammal jaws for my master's, and then I went on to do shark hydrodynamics, and then, now I'm doing TV. It's such a weird mishmash of things. All the time obsessed with wildlife, collecting fossils, every single museum I can go to.
Oh, fascinating.
So yeah, I'm very lucky to sort of ended up in this job, which is a perfect Venn diagram of very nerdy academic fossil stuff and really cool TV.
So I had an experience on making the show on Mythbusters that I'm wondering if you had, in which I would call up an expert who was an expert in a field I did not have a lot of intersection with, and I would ask them a question, and my question would upset them. Because my question was scientifically not even wrong. Like I was just jumping off the wrong platform to even start discussing this. But you have actually something I don't have, which is a degree in the sciences. I'm curious if you had the same experience a couple times.
I always assume that I'm done. So whenever I contact somebody first, I say, this is not my specialist field, but I'd really like your input. If I'm talking to somebody, I'll always say, can you just really dumb it down for me? Because oftentimes I need that too.
Yeah.
Just because I've studied this thing for a while doesn't mean I know everything, or I don't want to pretend. I don't want to nod my head. It's always better just to admit and have some humility. And that opens a lot of doors as well. And it often means you get more from the scientist as well. If they have to dumb down, they have to think about their own material more. So they can comprehend it themselves while they're talking. So you had that experience there.
Yeah, well, no, it was very educational because it wasn't like they realized they were upset. I could just tell my question pissed the guy off. And then I learned something fundamental in that specific phone call, that most things in the real world, we like to think that things have absolute values. Like this is 3 centimeters long and this weighs 10 grams or whatever. But scientifically, none of that's true.
Of course, right? No, of course, yeah.
Everything is describing a state of something between two other states in relationship to all these other things around it.
Geological time is a really good example because we'll quite happily say the dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago.
Right.
But in reality, we're basing that on a radiometric date, which has hundreds of thousands of years either side.
Right.
So, there's never an exact answer as much as we want one.
Is there something you learned on this production that super surprised or shocked or changed the way you think about things?
I think just from a production point of view, I had no idea quite how much work goes into these programs. I'd always assumed that there was a lot of waiting in the field for animals to do this, that, and the other. But I had no idea quite how much work goes into the preparation. That you have to figure out the seasons to find the animals. You have to really look for stories, look for angles. We had to fit it into an evolutionary story as well. So just the pure amount of work that went into it. But in terms of scientific facts, I think just really the importance of oxygen in the environment. Because before the oxygen started occurring, before photosynthesis began as a thing,
which is the reason we have oxygen.
Which is the reason we have oxygen, exactly.
Crazy.
There were archaeans, there were really primitive microbes that were living and dominated the planet completely. And when oxygen was produced, that was toxic to them and killed them out. It was, in many respects, one of the largest extinctions we've ever had, but it was on a microscopic scale. And so now we have those microbes living in the shadows. They're under the soil, and that's what you can smell with the sulfur. They're living in our stomachs. They're all those places where oxygen isn't. They're still existing, but they've been very much pushed to the sideline by the oxygen-producing photosynthesizers.
Amazing.
And it's all microscopic.
So I'm curious about the practicalities of your intersection with production. Did it begin with scripts? You started with a script and you make notes about what is and isn't accurate within the script?
The scripts were quite malleable for a long time because there was always new science coming out, which meant that we had to tweak numbers, measurements, that kind of thing.
And you're shooting in locations that are going to be also far-flung, and those might change, and that might change what you're covering. Or
yes, especially during COVID, where there were severe restrictions on occasion where we could go, etc. So there was constantly an idea of the storyboard and the story we wanted to tell. 4 billion years of life on Earth, not a small story, but one we wanted to tell. So there were always storyboards, there were always plans hands involved, but the details would change very often. And sometimes that was, some of the most interesting examples were, I would say, this animal looks like this. ILM would go away and make the skeleton, make the model. We'd get to the animation stage, and the producers who knew wildlife backwards, who watched cheetahs on the Serengeti, they'd said, okay, no, it needs to move this way. A big cat wouldn't do that. This animal wouldn't do that in that situation. And so everything was changed slightly along the way for the better. But it was such a Venn diagram of different fields.
Was there any, there must have also been parts where production was enamored of something that was just totally unrealistic and you had to keep on sort of weeding them away from it?
Yes. Yes. So yes. So T-Rex teeth was one of these where, obviously everyone wants to show the teeth. They're incredible. They are banana sized.
Yeah. For scale.
So these things were incredible and you want to show them off. Of course you do. But the latest science was creeping in that actually the consensus was building that these things were covered in a lip. They had a ligament or some kind of tissue over the top of the teeth, which means when you close the mouth, they're not sticking out the sides. They're actually encased within
none of that.
None of the teeth. Yeah. And that was horrifying to people who really wanted to show the teeth, because that's like the coolest thing about them, right? But in the end, everyone agreed that, this has to be an animal, not a monster. And so having those lips was important. Things like a Komodo dragon, a lion, for example, their teeth are covered despite the fact they're huge. So it was a tricky one, that one.
That to me is arguably one of the harder parts of the job, because, well, I know that for Mythbusters, my goal wasn't just to say that's not scientific, but I also realized production is trying to solve a problem. So you must also be bringing them solutions to the things you're saying you can't do.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And it's always important to have a solution before you go to them with a problem, because sometimes the solution is even more fun and interesting.
Right. Or counterintuitive or super.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's super neat. So you would go over the script and you would massage that to help bring that into some frame. What are the key points at which your expertise was necessary through the production all the way through editing?
Every stage, actually.
Really?
There were always bits and pieces that people needed some sort of help with the fact checking. So we had to make sure that everything was signed off scientifically. We had at least 3 sources for each thing. Often that included talking to scientists. I think we talked to over 150 scientists. Wow. So just making sure that this thing was airtight, or as airtight as we could make it. That was really my biggest contribution, I would say. But every stage, the animation, the skeleton, just making sure everything was accurate along the way. It was not just me at all. Every single person on that team was very keen to get everything right. So they would do as much research as me often. But I think because I'm a paleontologist, sometimes it was just, is this okay? And I go, yeah, it is. You've read more than me. That's great. That's really good.
Do you have any animators who kept on adding some facial expressions that the animal could not have had? You had to pull them back from the brain?
So, yeah, of course, there is some sort of artistic license there that's taken a bit too far. And I think my job and everyone else's job on the wildlife side was to say, this is the envelope. Cool, whatever you do in the middle, that's great, but this is the envelope of what they could do. Yeah.
That sounds thrilling. Is there an animal or a creature or an entity that you came out of this production with a deep affection or new admiration for?
Yes, and it's a very nerdy answer. I'm very sorry. I'm a fish scientist. I love fish. So we have we called it the fishapod. It's not actually called the fishapod. It's called Strepsidus. And it's this little lobe-finned fish. And before we came onto land, we started to develop fins that were very good at sort of getting through branches and all that kind of thing in the shallow water. So it was a very slow process to get onto land, but eventually those limbs that were really good at getting through reeds and whatnot, they helped us get up onto the onto land. And that moment we've got in the show where the fishapod creeps onto land it's darling. It's really nice. It's very cute. And I'm going to be showing that in lectures, that scene where it comes onto land, because the animation is perfect. The science is great. I'm really proud of it.
Amazing. And you can have Homer Simpson come stepping on.
Yes, exactly.
I'm also curious about a battle that, not to say a battle that you lost, but television production is very different than all sorts of other types of jobs, right? Like any job can be unique. I'm curious if there's an evolution, pun intended, of your clarity about what was quote unquote allowable in terms of being controversial or pushing the limits of what was of what you knew.
Yes, certainly. So that was always a back and forth. I was always the sort of hard scientist, and I would very often just say no. And that was
It's a very stressful thing to have to do.
Well, yeah, and at the start, I was very much an academic, and I would say no, no, no. But I gradually came to realize that actually, elephants can swim. There are peacocks can fly. There are all sorts of things in nature which are bonkers, but also happen.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with VFX for extinct creatures, I think you can't really get away with as much of that because it stretches the credulity of the thing. But there's definitely a middle ground. And so my evolution from start to finish has been one of accepting that they need to act like animals. They can't just be a textbook example of this, that, and the other. Still very much the bad guy in that regard. I'll say no to lots of things, but I definitely think I've become more naturalized within that biome of wildlife filmmaking.
Well, after Jurassic Park came out, I remember there was this urban legend that spread around that said that more money had been spent researching dinosaurs for Jurassic Park than had been spent in the field of paleontology up to that moment. I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds great.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious about is you're making this TV show. It's not an academic exercise, but you do have access to visualization tools that academia dreams about.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you feel like the production pushed forward our scientific understanding.
Yes.
Amazing.
So we were constantly talking to the scientists about making these animals. So the terror bird, for example, we had a paleontologist on board for every single stage. He would draw on minute details. So he was using ILM as a tool to create this animal as he'd been researching it, which was great.
Yeah.
But I mean, there were very real, there was an academic paper that came out specifically using our footage of a strawberry dart frog, for example.
Amazing.
So we did help the scientific community in that respect. The access to things like super high-speed camera work and that kind of thing are obviously really important. As for the VFX creatures, I'm really hoping that we can use some of those models to sort of figure out more about the paleobiology of these things.
Well, you're also relying on the institutional knowledge of the animators and how animals move and the volumes of their weight as they push around.
Yeah, there's no way of visualizing that with the skeleton alone. Yeah, absolutely.
I remember the first shot that I saw from Jurassic Park that thrilled me more than any other is that top shot of the foot going into the mud and seeing the skin pull over the internal.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, the Jurassic Park, there's a reason why it was so successful with the paleontology community and everyone, because those were animals for the first time. They weren't just monsters. They were, it was a zoo. And I was at a conference a few years ago in LA where they had a big, massive conference room full of, I think, maybe 2,000 paleontologists. And they put Jurassic Park on the screen. I think that Steven Spielberg was getting an honor.
Yeah.
And everyone's faces was just glued to the screen. They were captivated. Some of them were crying. I mean, it was so important as a film just to bring those animals to life.
I watched it just a year ago, and it still is absolutely perfect.
It's enchanting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is enchanting.
It pulls you right in. T-Rexes. I do have a copy of Sue at our offices, and I love her. I love thinking about being that low on the food chain, right? But the thing that's been blowing my mind is a recent paper about the fact that they think there might have been as many as 1 billion T-Rexes over its course here.
Yes. So this is so this is using teeth, I think. They were using, but so dinosaurs and things can lose teeth. So it's going to be quite hard to justify that number. I think it might be a bit pie in the sky. So that remains controversial.
Because a billion T-Rexes sounds like traffic jams of T-Rexes.
Like a horror film that's too busy. Yeah,
exactly.
No, I think they were very common. I mean, their commonality as well implies that they were not just living alone. Right. Because animals like predators that live alone were they're few and far between.
Oh.
When we look at the fossil record in the future,
you find them all nestled amongst each other.
Yeah, there have been the tyrannosaurs found together. And footprints found together as well. So it may be that these things were social. This is still really controversial because we're never going to find them sort of hanging out.
I know. I just was watching a video. I just was watching a video from a winter scene of a trail cam catching a wolf pack just walking past. Oh. And it's just watching these wolves casually being themselves in nature. So thrilling. Could you imagine T-Rexes?
Yeah, it would be incredible. And yeah, it's top of the food chain in the whole of the fossil record, really. I mean, those things were incredible. So
you got to sort of you'd be pushed through a crucible of modern understanding of these creatures and the current state of knowledge about them. Is there an aspect to paleontology that this show's brought clear to you that you're really excited about where we're going with it?
the amount of technology that paleontologists have been using is so impressive. So I just got a bit of a taste of this for my master's. I was using finite element analysis, which is a mechanical technique to work out stresses and strains. That's been used a lot since. They're using microwear engineering technologies to look at the teeth of these animals. They're using all sorts of imaging technology like photogrammetry and 3D scans, UV lights. I mean, there's all sorts of technology that's being used. When I was just a student, I got taken to the Swiss light source, which is a big donut light source that fires X-rays through a laser at tiny little fossil embryos and scans them. And that was mind-blowing. But the technology, they're so on it. It's such a multidisciplinary subject, and that's really exciting. And seeing some of that work come through and being able to use it on the screen for our story was great.
So all of these modern technologies that are being made possible by better and better, faster and faster processing cycles and stuff are really helping to push the field into the future.
Definitely. And it also helps the animators as well, because they are having to finally model fur and feathers. And, because for a long time we didn't think dinosaurs had feathers, but now we know. And for a long time the animation was, basic, should we say, or they just flattened them down and put a pattern over the top. But now it's the double-edged sword of they've got the technology and the computing power to do that, but it's also a massive pain. So, that's really helpful, but also, yeah.
Well, you must have also found some animators had their specialties. Like this guy could do a T-Rex all day long, but don't give him a bird.
There were some fantastic animators. Yestin was one of one of them there, and he just had such an intuitive knowledge about how animals moved and everything. But they have separate people for the animation stages, for the grooming, which is the putting the feather and the furs on them, the color, the texturing, all of the kind of stuff. It's very everyone's got their own little role.
Yeah. Well, so as someone who has worked so hard over your career to help lay people understand the complexities of the world, I'm curious what you feel about the overall science literacy of the world as we're currently. Whether you're optimistic about it, pessimistic, how you feel?
I'm optimistic about it, because I know that there's a curiosity there. And you just have to see a toddler walk into a museum and see a dinosaur and see their eyes light up. And if they're given the opportunity to learn about those things, you just know that they'll absorb it like anything. So I'm ultimately very optimistic. I think people want knowledge. I don't think they have access to it all the time, which is disappointing. But yeah, everyone's curious. Everyone is. Everyone's a scientist.
And when you go and chase the answers to stuff, the answers are often way cooler than any story you could ever make up in your head.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much for this. It's really a pleasure. I can't wait to see this show.
Thank you very much.